Shane Bauer first approached the Nation Institute's investigative fund in November of 2008, proposing a pair of investigations that would require him to go into the Iraq war zone as an unembedded reporter. The investigative fund worked closely with Shane to help him secure his visa, connected him with the LA Times Foreign Bureau in Baghdad in case of emergency, and set up a detailed system of check-ins for the duration of his time on the ground in Iraq. That July, while on a hiking trip in the region, Shane, along with his girlfriend, Sarah Shord, and his best friend, Josh Fatal, were arrested by Iranian authorities when they strayed too close to the Iran-Iraq border. And in September of 2010, Sarah was released. 1 year later, after a show trial, Shane and Josh were finally freed. A footnote, Shane had proposed to Sarah while they were in prison, and they got married in May of 2012. Though they each, Josh, Sarah, Shane, emerged scarred by the experience, Shane's time in solitary confinement in Iran for more than 2 years continued to deeply unsettle him. When he finally came home, Shane read voraciously to catch up with what had happened while he was locked away in isolation. I remember he came into the Nation offices, and Richard Kim, who had worked with Shane, Esther Kaplan, we felt like Rip Van Winkle had come into our place. 2 years. We spent hours talking about what you had missed. But what you wanted to find, and you did in your voracious reading, you found out that in a news story about a California prisoner who had died while on hunger strike, and you, who had spent 4 months in solitary and had gone on hunger strike yourself in Iran, soon realized that this California inmate, just one of 12,000 prisoners who took part in related protests, was contesting a policy almost entirely unknown to the general public, validating, that is, classifying thousands of inmates as gang associates, sending them to indefinite terms that could last years, even decades. This is a system that, as one lawyer Shane spoke to said, has no place in a constitutional democracy. Shane's Mother Jones cover story is a powerful expose of this little-known practice, told from the human perspective of someone who has been there himself, who understands the living death of solitary like few other journalists. The piece gathered media attention nationwide. In legal circles, the story has had important impact, with Shane's investigation leading the California Department of Corrections to review individual solitary cases. And as of January, officials had notified 51 inmates that they'd be moved into the general prison population. In a measure of the personal power of his piece, hundreds of letters have poured in from prisoners around this country who've been moved, some say astounded, to see their plight gain attention in the world, in many ways because Shane Bauer is a journalist who has been there himself. It is an honor for the Hillmans to honor Shane Bauer.
Thank you so much. It's really, really a big honor to receive this award. Thanks so much to the judges and the Hillman Foundation. I also really want to thank the experts and activists and lawyers that have been working on this issue, some for decades. I think sometimes we, as journalists, get recognized for this work, but really the real work is, the sustained work is happening, with people that are working on this year after year, often for little or no money. And those people really made this story possible. I spent 26 months in Evin prison in Iran. 4 of those were in solitary confinement. Those are the worst 4 months of my life by far. The next 22 months I was in a cell with my friend Josh. But when I got out of prison, the isolation wasn't over, I realized. I had to kind of learn how to be in society again. I had to learn how to be in crowds. I had to learn how to be able to be alone. It's a long process, and it was ever present. And I realized that, in kind of whenever you consume your life is consumed with something, you kind of see it through that lens. And I was seeing, the world still through prison and through isolation. So when I heard about this hunger strike that was going on in California shortly after I was released, I was really drawn to it because I had gone on hunger strike for similar reasons myself. After learning about Christian Gomez's case, the person that died in the hunger strike, I met with a lawyer to kind of talk about this. It was about 6 months after I'd been released. I felt ready to kind of get back into my work again. And I was talking to her about it, and she had this folder on her desk, and she kind of pushed it aside and said, this guy just had his solitary, he's been in solitary confinement for 20 years. He was just renewed for 6 years because he had a book about the Black Panthers. And I was like, wow, can I see that folder? And she said, well, I need to ask this guy. And you know, I didn't quite believe it. And eventually she got his permission. I was in touch with him, got kind of corroborating evidence that he actually did have his solitary confinement renewed for 6 years for a book. And I quickly kind of I ended up getting in touch with dozens of prisoners, corresponded with about 20, and kind of became addicted to amassing kind of documentation. And it was really shocking. I mean, I was learning that some of the evidence used to put people in solitary confinement included things like Sun Tzu's Art of War, included journal writings about African-American history, mentioning of Nat Turner, Malcolm X. This was all considered gang material. After working on this story for a couple of months, I asked the Department of Corrections if I could visit, and thankfully they said that I could go to Pelican Bay Prison, and they asked me if I wanted to bring a videographer, which I was really surprised by. So I went with James West from Mother Jones, and we went inside this prison, and we were really both shocked kind of with, in the lead up to this, they were kind of saying to me, when you go there, this is really going to kind of dispel myths about the conditions of this place. And it was really shocking to see that the kind of world that they were in, that they would think that bringing somebody inside with a video camera would make them look better. I mean, these were 7-foot by 11-foot cells that people live in this prison. Almost 80 people have lived in for 20 years or more alone. They have no windows. I met a person there that hadn't seen a tree in 12 years. Really horrific stuff. After this visit, the Department of Corrections kind of drew back, and they canceled a lot of my interviews. They stopped kind of responding to requests for information, and I started having to kind of use legal language to get facts about prisons, Public Records Act requests. So it kind of drew out for many months. I really want to thank Mother Jones for putting so much behind this story. This is really ultimately a very dark story, and they really threw a lot into it. I also really want to thank Esther Kaplan and the Nation Institute. Esther knew, right away that this was an important story and made it possible. I wouldn't have been able to do this without them. I also want to thank James, who happily jumped on a plane and drove to this prison with me and made a great video that's online. And I also really, even though they won't hear this, want to thank the inmates that were a part of this story. They were really incredible sources. I mean, they really not only were subjects of the story, but they also took great risks in their communication with me and in sending me massive packets of evidence, official prison documentation, with table of contents, big files that were neatly organized. And ultimately they did this because they had some small hope that this would end. And I think that the recognition of this issue is getting tonight is kind of showing that there's reason for that hope. So thanks.